Hi everybody, it's Mrs. Aurelia. Me and Frankie are sitting in the backyard and enjoying some sunshine today. So today we are going to be reading a book, and it is about Neil deGrasse Tyson. I don't know if you've heard of him before, but he is a really cool guy that's really, really smart. He is all about space and sharing like learning more and more about space and then sharing that with everyday people that so he like takes the really technical scientific language about space and then likes to make it so that everybody can understand it and everybody can access it and learn more about space. So today we are going to read a book about Neil deGrasse Tyson, and we are going to learn a little bit about where his interest in space came from, and then we're going to do a little bit of exploring space on our own. So I am going to go ahead and start sharing my screen with you and show you our book for the day. So again, we are going to be reading a book from Sora, and so you can go in and read this book later again if you want to. And it is called Starstruck, and it is the cosmic journey of Neil deGrasse Tyson. So it is written by Kathleen Cruel and Paul Brewer, and it is illustrated by Frank Morrison. I really like the way that this book is written. I think usually when we think about books that are going to be about science, we expect them to have like lots of photographs and diagrams and that kind of thing in them. But this book really takes like a more artistic approach to teaching us about science and mixes science and art in a really cool way. Then the website that we're going to look at later today does something similar. So we're going to go ahead and get started. It's a really cool picture, an artistic representation of space. This one too. And then it has a quote here by Neil deGrasse Tyson that says, "Everyone should have their mind blown once a day." I really like that quote. I want you to take a second and think about it. Do you think that everyone should have their mind blown once a day? Our universe began its dance with what scientists call the Big Bang. After many millions of years of darkness, spots of impossible brightness, stars sizzled into shape. Some grew so massive that they exploded, spewing stardust every which way. Boom! The stardust contained what was needed to create more shapes, more patterns, the planets, our whole universe. This is where all of the material that's in our universe came from. Zoom forward almost 13.8 billion years to the Sky Theater at Hayden Planetarium in New York City. So planetarium, if you've ever been to OMSI before, we have a planetarium that is in OMSI. So it's a place where you go and you sit in a chair, kind of like a movie theater chair, and then you look up and it puts the stars and the planets up on the ceiling for you to see. So those are really cool places, and that's where this is beginning with Neil deGrasse Tyson as a kid. On the dome ceiling, the planets and the constellations created by the Big Bang pulsed against the black ink of space. 9-year-old Neil deGrasse Tyson had never seen so many stars. After all, from his apartment in the Bronx, it looked like there were only about 12. Now above him were what seemed like millions, too many to be real. Was this just a hoax? A joke? He wasn't sure, but when the lights came on, his thoughts began to explode. "The universe called me," he said simply, and he would never be the same. Starstruck, Neil started looking up whenever he could. Even though he lived in an apartment building named Skyview, his view of the night sky wasn't very good. Too many bright city lights got in the way. So that's why when you go out at night, sorry if you hear in the background, that's Frankie. If you go out at night and you look up at the stars, you can't see the billions and billions of stars, trillions and trillions of stars that are up there because the lights prevent us from being able to see all of the ones that aren't quite as bright. So we're only seeing the brightest ones when we look up. His good friend Philip lent him a pair of binoculars. Neil used them to peer at the moonscape over the Hudson River, the glossy orb with its craters and shadows. And it came alive, he marveled. On a family trip out of the city, away from all of the lights, he was able to see more. Sure enough, the night sky really did look like the one at the beginning, the one at the Hayden Planetarium. It was real. The sheer wonder of it all, the blinding beauty, the mysteries just waiting to be solved, fascinated him. Neil was hooked. He had a whole new goal. Becoming a basketball player was out. Now he was going to be an astrophysicist, a scientist who studies the universe. So if you are someone who studies the universe, a scientist that studies the universe, you call yourself an astrophysicist. Neil's parents weren't scientists, and they weren't rich, but they did everything they could to help. For his 12th birthday, they bought him a telescope. Atop the 20 stories of sky view, he examined the night sky in all its glimmering glory. His parents also bought him every science book on sale so he could learn about what he was looking at. Neil had one of the biggest libraries of any kid at school. His knowledge of the stars began to explode. He was getting really knowledgeable because he's studying more and more everything he can about space. Oops, let me go back a page. The more Neil learned, the more he thirsted to know. But he needed a bigger, better telescope, one that cost more money than his parents could afford. So he's been going through this process where he started just by looking up the stars, and then he got binoculars, and then he got a telescope, and now he's feeling like he needs an even better telescope to learn more. Neil solved his own problem. He offered to walk his neighbor's dogs for pay. These were pampered city dogs with cute names like Tuffy. On rainy days, some of them even wore their own raincoats and boots. Frankie has her own raincoats. She's a spoiled city dog, too. Eventually, he saved enough money to buy a 5-foot-long telescope with his parents' help. Neil headed back up to the roof. Sometimes people saw him up there and were afraid. What was an African-American boy doing on the roof? Was his long telescope really a rifle? Was he an armed robber? Often, they called the police. Neil solved this problem, too. When police officers stopped by, he would offer them a view from his telescope. He showed off the stars like powdered sugar flung against black velvet. He would point out his favorite planet, Saturn. Saturn just blew his mind. With its dozens of moons and its studding elaborate rings, it was the most gorgeous thing he had ever seen. The police officers would usually end up won over. It turned out Neil could make others starstruck too. So just like Neil deGrasse Tyson now really likes sharing his knowledge of planets that he learns from being an astrophysicist with people. He started that in an early age by showing it with police officers. It's a shame that he had to do that people called the police on him. And I want you to think about what that would feel like, being on top of a roof and just trying to look at stars and having the cops called on you because they were worried that you were doing something. I want you to think about what that feels like and how Neil is still rising above that and still teaching people wanting to learn more about space and teach people about space. Neil loved school. He loved to learn. Oops, 1 second. Neil loved school. He loved to learn, but not every teacher was his fan. Your son laughs too loud, one told his mom. On his report cards, they complained that he spent more time talking to friends than paying attention. But his 6th grade teacher noticed something. Every single book report he wrote had to do with astronomy. So astronomy is the study of space, the stars. She told him about a class at the Hayden Planetarium, advanced topics in astronomy for young people. Neil took the subway to classes at the planetarium by himself. He was often the youngest person, and some information sailed right over his head, but he wouldn't quit, pushing himself to learn more and more. So right here, I want you to take a second and think about the character of Neil. And I want you to think about what we've been learning about him and what some character traits are that you would use to describe Neil. So how would you describe Neil as a person? I think something that I would use to describe him is that he is very determined. He doesn't take no for an answer, and he uses his own motivation to keep trying and trying to learn more and more about space. Neil's quest to understand the cosmos made him a young star at the planetarium. The director of education was so impressed that he invited Neil on an unbelievable journey to the coast of Northwest Africa. An ocean liner was being turned into a floating laboratory to view a total solar eclipse. 2,000 scientists and observers, including famous astronauts and science fiction writers, were making the 2-week trip. At 14, his trusty telescope in hand, Neil was the youngest scientist on board. Observing and studying the eclipse alongside expert scientists made him feel like a science superhero. Then, on the way home, he won the dance contest and the trivia contest, thanks to his knowledge of Saturn. The perfect ending to his first expedition. After passing tough tests, he made it into the Bronx High School of Science. He was a card-carrying nerd kid, winning science fair prizes and subscribing to the brainy Scientific American magazine. In the lab, he was trying not to blow things up. In his physics classes, he was getting to know the universe. His life wasn't all science. He excelled at dance, from ballet to ballroom, and was captain of the wrestling team. He even used his understanding of physics to help him win his wrestling matches. That's something else interesting to think about. How would knowing science and physics, which is the study of like how things move, how would knowing physics help him to be a better wrestler? That's not usually a way that we think of applying science, but that's a way that Neil applied science. When he was 15, Neil got to go to a summer astronomy camp in the Mojave Desert in Southern California. Scorpions, tarantulas, and howling coyotes? No problem. This was bliss. Days were full of classes on the subjects he loved. Nights were for observing with high-powered telescopes. So far from the city lights, the stars burst with more radiance and in much greater numbers than he'd seen since his first visit to the Hayden Planetarium. It was too inspiring for words, but with his dog walking money, he'd also bought a good camera for taking sky pictures. He used the camera to bring home the galaxies, constellations, moons, and planets he captured on film, and shared his pictures with 50 adults at his first public talk at City College of New York. Was he nervous? No. Talking about science was like breathing, and people liked his explosive excitement. A career in astrophysics was Neil's only goal. Many people noticed his ability and pushed him forward. Some didn't. He often had to cope with racism. Neil even had friends who thought a future as an athlete or a leader in the African American community would be a better goal for Neil than becoming a scientist. So this reminds me of this idea that we were talking about in library whenever people are told that they should do something different than what they're doing, but they really believe in themselves and keep pushing and pushing. So that reminds me of a lot of the people that we've read in library, like about the guy who created the Super Soaker, and about Mae Jemison, who was the first woman to go to, the first African-American woman to go to space. So it reminds me of a lot of people that keep pushing and pushing even when they're told no, that we've been reading about and learning about. But Neil had a strength burning inside, a flaming passion. He pictured it as a tank of rocket fuel, and every new discovery, like seeing Saturn through a telescope for the first time, poured fuel into that tank. By the time he was starting to pick a college, his reputation in the scientific community was growing. The most famous scientist of his day, the astronomer Carl Sagan, hoped to convince Neil to come to his school. On one snowy February afternoon, Neil took the bus to visit Sagan at Cornell University in Ithaca, New York. They talked nonstop about science while Neil toured the labs, and then Sagan drove the high school senior through the snow back to the bus station. In case the bus had trouble with the snow and Neil needed a place to stay, Sagan gave Neil his home phone number. Neil was touched, but he'd also heard many good things about Harvard University, and that's the school he chose. So he has this famous scientist telling him he should come study at his school, and he still decided to go a different direction. In college, he stretched his muscles by wrestling, dancing, and running up and down every single path through the seats at the campus stadium. He stretched his brain by inhaling physics, mastering equations, and experimenting. And he stretched his wallet, earning money by writing, teaching, and tutoring. After 11 more years of school, he earned the highest degree possible in astrophysics. He was literally 1 in a million, a star. Neil kept looking up, continuing his research, solving mysteries. Then at age 35, he went to work at his beloved Hayden Planetarium, the very place where his dream had started. Eventually, he rose to become its director. One day, a TV station asked him to appear as an expert. He was happy to explain that day's news about a solar flare, a small explosion on the sun. Afterward, Neil was jolted. I'd never before in my life seen an interview with a Black person on television for expertise that had nothing to do with being Black. He made it his mission to be visible, letting his enthusiasm explode in the public. He wanted to infect others with his sense of awe and wonder at the universe. Who wouldn't want to study it? As he learned more and more new things in his research, it made him giddy, wanting to grab people in the street and say, "Have you heard this?" Then it was time for the Hayden Planetarium to update its display of the planets. Neil met with other scientists and looked at the latest discoveries. And in 2000, they made a stunning decision. Pluto, then the smallest planet, would no longer be labeled as a planet in the new solar system display. So this happened when I was alive. They decided it had more in common with a smaller, icy object than it did with other planets. Neil got hate mail from Pluto lovers everywhere, but he showed that the frontier of science can change as new facts get discovered. 6 years later, the International Astronomical Union agreed with him. Pluto was demoted to a dwarf planet. No one has quite as much fun talking about science as Neil deGrasse Tyson. He is able to summon all that social energy his earliest teachers complained about. Fascinating facts tumble out, one explosion after another. He waves his hands and snaps his fingers. Laughter bubbles up, sometimes turning into a roar. Equations are awesome. The universe is hilarious. Certain equations make him misty. The sight of Saturn is simply jaw-dropping. He used a lot of exclamations like, "Whoa." Oh, I want you to take a second and think about that. Is that the way that you normally expect people to talk about science? Like if you see a scientist on TV, do you expect them to say words like awesome and call the universe hilarious? Is that how you expect? Or do you think maybe that's something different and that's why people are drawn to listening to Neil deGrasse Tyson speak? He has a strong opinion on just about anything scientific, from the mystery of dark matter to the silliness of zombies. I have odd cosmic thoughts every day, he says. Wearing one of his many star-themed ties, he has more than 100. He never gets tired of appearing in public and dancing with words to describe science. He also pours energy into articles, books, tweets, and TV appearances. While Neil is rocking the world of science, he hangs on to his memory of being a small boy, having his mind blown under the starry dome. Sometimes when he's in a remote area and sees all those stars, he thinks, this looks just like the Hayden Planetarium. And when he goes outside, he still looks up. I don't ever want to lose that. In life and in the universe, it's always best to keep looking up. I love that message. In life and in the universe, it's always best to keep looking up. So that is the end of the book, and this last part just tells us a little bit more about Neil deGrasse Tyson. It's kind of hard to read on this screen, but if you go ahead and go to the Sora book and read it yourself, you can read a little bit more about Neil deGrasse Tyson. You can also just search him up and see that he has lots and lots of talks about space. And then this is also really important. It's kind of hard to see, but like any good piece of research, this book includes sources that tell you where they got the information from. So that is the end of our book about Neil deGrasse Tyson. But like Neil deGrasse Tyson, I also think that we should have the opportunity to have our minds blown every day. So I also want you to take a little bit after watching this read aloud to take some time to explore this website. It's part from NASA, and it is it's an exoplanet exploration. So an exoplanet is defined as any planet beyond our solar system. So in our solar system, we have planets like Earth, Mars, Saturn, Neil's favorite, Uranus, Neptune, Venus, Jupiter. And so this is about any planet that's beyond our solar system. So there is some information on here about planets outside of our solar system. I'm going to read you just a little bit. So it says the Planet Hunting Space Telescope was still getting its bearings just a few months after launch when the floodgates burst open. So this is about a telescope that went into space to find some of these exoplanets. As NASA's Kepler Space Telescope science team was wrapping up a 10-day trial run, they saw something that bordered on the unbelievable. The telescope's first detection of a rocky, Earth-sized world outside of our solar system. So this is about the discovery of planets, some of them that are like Earth, and we thought that maybe there weren't any Earth-like planets, or we were having a hard time finding Earth-like planets, and this is about how those exoplanets were discovered. So you can go ahead and read this. So this is on the What is an Exoplanet tab up here. Then after that, I want you to go to this Explore tab and click on that. And here, I want us to go to this first one here that is Exoplanet Travel Bureau. Go ahead and enter that. So the idea of this is the idea of taking a trip outside of our solar system. So like our book today combined learning about science with art, this kind of does the same thing. So the idea of this website is to explore the galaxy. So these are posters that have been created by artists that show some of the exoplanets, and they show you what it would look like if there was a poster that was advertising having you go travel to that place. So these are like travel posters for the exoplanets. So you can get the poster down here. You can also color it. So you could print it out and color the poster if you want to. You can also read these in Spanish if you would like that option. And then it has this cool link here that is Explore the Surface. And you can also scroll through and see lots of different planets. So I'm going to pick one that looks interesting to me. Let's see here. So these are all the posters from, I'm going to go to this one. So this one looks interesting to me, and it has this button here that says Explore the Surface. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. And so these are, and it's going to give us a little message that's going to pop up in a second, but these are representations of what we think the planets would look like based on what artists have created. So these aren't like actual pictures of the planets, but they are what we think the planets would look like based on what we know about them. So you can go ahead and explore these and look around and see what the surface of these other planets would look like. So I want you to take a little bit and explore that. And then I want you to answer this question. What do you think it would be like if people could travel to other planets? Like if we could see these posters and we could be like, okay, I'm going to travel to that other planet, just like going to a different place, just being able to like fly to Hawaii. How do you think that would change? Would anything be different? Do you think that you would want to travel to these other planets, or do you think you'd be more comfortable staying on Earth? Because I imagine that going in the rocket to get there would be pretty scary. So do you think you would be brave enough to do that? Or do you think that you would rather stay on Earth? So that's the question that I want you to think about as you look at the exoplanets and explore on the NASA website. So thank you again for joining me for today's read aloud, and I hope that something today blows your mind. Again, I miss you, but I'm really happy to be connecting with you and being able to read with you again. Have a good day and enjoy the sunshine. Bye.